So we are defining the kingdom of God only by looking at God Himself. He, because of who He is, His nature and His character, He and He alone is God, and He is the kingdom of God. Now, when we use the terms kingdom of God, kingdom of heaven, and there are a variety of other terms used in the New Testament particularly, we want to look at those terms to just briefly understand them. First, the kingdom of God. That is a term that's used 4 times in Matthew, 14 times in Mark, 32 times in Luke, twice in John, 6 times in Acts, 8 times by Paul, and 1 time in Revelation. And again, you'll also, as you read through the New Testament, you'll run into the term kingdom of heaven. It's used 33 times in Matthew and once in John. Now, some people say that the kingdom of God and the kingdom of heaven are different. They are absolutely not different. They are describing the same thing. As a matter of fact, in Matthew chapter 19, verses 23 to 24, Jesus, in just those 2 verses, uses those 2 terms interchangeably. So we see that they are the same term, just a different way of saying it. The kingdom of God and the kingdom of heaven are linguistic variations of the same idea. Matthew was writing his gospel primarily from a framework of Jewish tradition, and so often he would substitute an acceptable term for God. The Jews often didn't use the name of God because God's name is so holy to them. So Matthew would use a different term, and he used frequently the term kingdom of heaven. But when he said kingdom of heaven, he was referring to the kingdom of God. Now also throughout other places in the New Testament, you'll see other terms used. For instance, in Colossians 1:13, the kingdom of the Son of His love. 2 Timothy 4:18, the heavenly kingdom. Once again, I want to remind you, all of these different terms are referring to only one kingdom, the kingdom of God. Now, the kingdom of God is His kingship, His rule, His authority, His right to rule because of who He is. And the Scriptures begin to reveal some very important principles about the kingdom. Let me just give a few of those to you very quickly. The first is in Mark chapter 10, verses 13 to 16. Jesus said we are to receive the kingdom as a little child. It means we are to receive with trust and full submission to the rule of God within our lives. In Matthew 6:33, this is such an important verse. Jesus says that we are to seek first the kingdom of God and His righteousness. Seeking first means that the kingdom is the object of our seeking. It's not the church. It's not salvation in heaven. It is the rulership of the King within us. We are seeking God's true righteousness by embracing His rule and authority and reign in our hearts and lives. This becomes even more clear when you compare it to a passage like Matthew 5:20, where Jesus said, unless your righteousness exceed that of the Pharisees, you will in no wise enter the kingdom of heaven. Now, what was Jesus saying? The Pharisees, who were the professional religious leaders of the day, they were relying upon their works, their ability, their attempt at reaching God through what they did. And Jesus said that righteousness is not sufficient. You must have a greater righteousness, a righteousness that is based on seeking God Himself and bringing and allowing and believing in His rule and reign in our hearts. Now, apart from the reign of God, heaven is meaningless. It is empty. It is a wishful notion of some better place. Heaven is about being in God's presence. Wherever God's presence is, there is His kingdom. And I can tell you, being in His presence is heaven indeed. When we as pastors and leaders, when we do everything we can and with our submission, our worship, our hearts turned in faith towards God, and begin to make place for the presence of God in our midst, you are literally welcoming heaven, His kingdom, His rulership, His authority to come into your midst. And it's His kingship, His kingdom that changes people's lives. God can do more in 1 minute, and being in His presence can change people more in 1 minute than all of our sermons, all of our song lists, and everything else that we try to do. Jesus wants to reveal His kingdom to you and I. God is our King. His kingdom is all about His rule, His reign, and authority, not just in heaven, but here on earth as well.